And we'll talk about that. We're going to look at 2020 and the economy. Those 6 states are set to hold Democratic primaries tomorrow. It is basically a two-person race between former Vice President Joe Biden and Senator Bernie Sanders, both candidates making their case to voters in Michigan, where President Trump won narrowly in 2016. The primary comes just days after Friday's blowout jobs numbers. The economy added 273,000 jobs in the month of February. The unemployment rate dipping back below and to a 50-year low, down to 3.5%. Joining us right now is senior fellow at the National Taxpayers Union, Forward Strategies President Mattie Duppler. Mattie, good to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. We are in a rough ride this morning. Do you think Democrats can compete with this Trump economy, or do you think this subject of a massive sell-off on Wall Street, the reaction to coronavirus, will that come up in these primaries?
I think it'll certainly come up. But listen, Democrats still have a long road ahead of them to combat the Trump economy. Remember, the stock market, even though it's grabbing headlines, is not necessarily an analog for the economy. It is just one component of the economy. And we've heard a lot about how successful the stock market has been, particularly under the Trump administration. But going into last week, we had a ton of great data that showed that the economy was strong. And indeed, that is what Jay Powell said in his remarks about the emergency measure that the Federal Reserve took, that the underlying fundamentals still remain strong. You mentioned the job numbers, Maria. That is something that has been a consistent bright spot in this economy. 273,000 jobs created last month. That blew expectations out of the water by almost 100,000 jobs. So we're still surprising to the upside on a lot of that data, which again really helps American voters put their arms around what the economy feels like. When it comes to unemployment, when it comes to wage growth, which is also rising, that's where Americans really feel the economy, and that's where they tend to vote as well. So no doubt the coronavirus is going to be a problem both for the economy and from a public health perspective. But there are still a lot of aspects about this economy that mean we're going into this crisis from a position of strength, not one of weakness.
Mattie, it's Dagan McDowell. No disagreement there, but we've never had a president before who tweeted and bragged about a record high in the stock market. And I said it from day one before President Trump's inauguration. You own it on the way up, then you're going to own it on the way down. And so we don't have any way to judge right now how voters might react to a downdraft in stocks.
Yeah, that's absolutely right, Dagan. And I think that the president himself really needs to start taking a much more discreet tone, not just on his Twitter feed, right? The entire administration needs to be much more clear with the American public as to how these aspects, how these responses to the virus are going to play out and what Americans can expect. Now, when it comes to the election in November, typically voters' opinions about the economy tend to crystallize around July or so, leading into a November election. Yeah. So that's really, I think, the runway that we have here. Right now, remember, we're still very early in the year. The administration needs to have a very transparent and clear response to the virus, so Americans' expectations are set on what they're going to see in terms of the spread. And then when we come out, hopefully, in a couple of months of this scare on the pandemic, then we can start talking about the economy again and start refocusing on the fundamentals and how Americans feel about their circumstances.
Yeah, but I mean, it's more than just the reactions to the coronavirus. I mean, we may need a reaction to the economy sooner rather than later, Kelly. I mean, you got Wall Street firms predicting the probability that Congress is going to come up with a fiscal measure in response to what's going on, especially with oil prices collapsing. Kevin McCarthy yesterday on Sunday Morning Future says that Congress needs to have a surgical approach, perhaps doing some stimulus for certain sectors like the airline sector.
Well, I agree, Maria. But one of the problems, of course, is everybody wants to get their piece in, and people will, senators and congressmen and women, my state needs this, it needs that. And I worry that are they going to do something before it's necessary? And Mattie, of course, with the election being this year, are people in Congress going to be too eager to do something that, again, like you're saying, months later, we might not even need?
Exactly. I think that the response needs to be targeted. It needs to really be geared towards what the actual effect of something like a quarantine would be. The fact that people can't work. They'll be concerned about paying their mortgages. Maria brought up a good point earlier, though, about the fact that the consumer still remains the bright spot in this economy. So lower oil prices, even though a crash in the price is problematic for a number of macroeconomic reasons, lower oil prices, the fact that people are refinancing their mortgages means that there's actually more discretionary income that's going to be out there. The question is whether or not Americans are going to have the opportunity to spend it. So we need measures in place where Americans feel like they can continue to row the boat, as you may say, before they have a personal financial crisis, like not being able to pay their mortgage. But certainly a large fiscal stimulus that isn't targeted in that respect would not, I think, do much to prevent some of the dire conversations we're having about what might happen as a result of this virus.
We'll see. We're going to get a response. We're getting a response from the Federal Reserve this morning, the New York Fed, certainly, in terms of the repo markets. We will likely get a response from Congress as well. Mattie, it's good to see you this morning. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Mattie Duppler with the latest there. Let's head over to Studio B.